Hey everybody, I'm Mike McNeil. I'm the creator and benevolent dictator for life of the Sails framework, and I'm the CEO of Fleet, open source device management. So today I'm going to talk about how to build static sites with Sails.js using JavaScript. And saying JavaScript here really is pretty. The JavaScript you're going to write is pretty minimal. And actually, by the end of this talk, if you follow the strategies here, you should be able to pretty much copy and paste what I've done and apply this to your own website in the context of a sales app. And the amount of actual JavaScript you're going to have to write is pretty minimal. This all started back in 2013 when I needed to make a documentation website for Sails.js.com. We'd had our docs in Markdown for a long time, originally in the GitHub wiki format, and then eventually as Markdown files in a repo. And it was always great to edit docs as Markdown. Most folks do it that way. You have a lot of control without really requiring a lot of in-the-weeds editing of like HTML, and you don't have quite as much customization, but it's a lot easier to manage day to day than setting up something like a WordPress, especially if you have folks that are contributing from all over the world that maybe don't have experience with a particular CMS. So why not static site generators, right? Things like Jekyll and Gatsby are great, and I have no complaints about folks that want to go that direction. For me, just for the same reason of accessibility, I really wanted something that would let anybody be able to quickly click a link that says edit and then just write Markdown, which for context, Markdown is one of the languages, or at least it used to be in Tumblr, which is a blogging platform. Folks from even outside of the tech community are comfortable with Markdown in a lot of cases, and it's super easy to learn. I've taught it to at least 20 people over the course of my career. So the goal of getting everything in Markdown was easier said than done, right? Because in order to make that possible, a lot of moving pieces had to align. One, you got to have a way for people to get the actual Markdown content for the page that they're looking at. So you got to have a way to link back and forth from the website to the actual Markdown file on GitHub. You've got to have a way for people to actually edit the Markdown and save it. So you either have to build your own content management system, or you have to use something like GitHub that's already there and then integrate with it so that it will redeploy your website whenever anything changes. And then there's the nav, right? So whether we're talking about like a sitemap so that Google can find your pages that are important to you to show up in search engines, or it's even just the navigation that shows up in the sidebar or maybe on mobile in the little hamburger button. All that has to be built. And originally, Nick Crumrine and I built that for the original Sails.js.com in 2013. And over the years, it was one of those things we invested as little time as possible in maintaining it. But it slowly got better and better and better. And as these things tend to happen, it kept getting rewritten and pieces of it redone. And eventually, all of that really condensed down to what amounts to like 1 or 2 files that you need to take any sales app and actually do the same thing yourself. And not just for the docs, but also for your blog articles, right, that you might normally put on something like a Medium or a Substack or a WordPress. That all can be in Markdown too. Can even go as far as making landing pages in Markdown. Really, the sky's the limit. But the sweet spot, in my experience, at least for an open core company like the one that I work at, Fleet, we really wanted to make sure that we had our docs covered, really easy to access and edit for anybody out there. We wanted to make sure that the blog could live on our domain and be in just as easy to edit as everything else. And then we also wanted to make sure that our company handbook, which is public, was something that anybody could contribute to, whether or not they actually worked at the company. So I'm going to share my screen and pop over to the Fleet repo. So everything you're going to look at today in this talk is actually public and open source. And while I'm sure in the future aspects of it will change, like maybe some folders might move around, the general concept really hasn't changed in the last 8 years. And it's just gotten better and better and easier to do as the Sails framework has matured and as more stability exists in Node in general. And especially thanks to the async await capabilities that were added to JavaScript, and I think made it to Node in 2016 stable. Really made all this code a lot simpler to work with. So what I'll do first is just kind of walk you through what the actual website that this produces looks like, and then we'll look into how it works, and I'll point you to exactly where you would need to go to kind of emulate this yourself. Or riff on it and make it your own. So this website is fleetdm.com, and you can see it's a pretty standard looking marketing website. You've got your homepage, and this is not controlled by Markdown, at least not at the time of this recording. And it could be. Really, there's no reason why any of your landing pages or the content pages of your website can't be driven by Markdown. It's really just a matter of where do you get the most bang for your buck, right, in terms of investment of time. So what that is on our site is the documentation, which looks something like this, the handbook, which looks something like this. And this is inspired by GitLab's public handbook, which if you haven't seen it is pretty amazing resource. It covers everything that they do at GitLab internally in terms of how they manage the business. If you've ever wondered how to set up a sales team or set up a marketing department, it's all there basically, 99% of it. And some of it's hidden behind private Google Docs, I think out of necessity. But super useful and definitely an inspiration for why we do it the way we do it at Fleet. Anyways, this is the handbook that we were talking about, and then one other section which we just added recently is the blog. So I'll just navigate direct to it here. And this is actually ported over. So we started moving content, especially thanks to Eric on our team, who grabbed this content from Medium, where it used to live, and then brought these files into Markdown. And now each of these blog articles is actually on the website, and it's actually on fleetdm.com. It doesn't have to be on a subdomain like blog.fleetdm.com. So how does all this work? I'll start by just actually clicking edit. So I'll pop over to the docs. You can see that the search here is actually implemented with a tool or platform called Algolia. So what that means is I can search for questions I might have, like, I don't know, supported browsers. And you can see there's lots of results. And this actually it kind of crawls your site automatically. And Algolia also supports open source projects for free, which is awesome. All of this is really part of the front end integration that also is all open source. We're mostly going to focus on the back end piece since this is a talk about Sails.js. But we'll touch a little bit on the front end piece as well, just so you can see where that code is and learn from it if it's helpful. And the cool thing about Algolia is it really mostly takes care of itself. The integration pane is pretty light, and you get a lot of bang for your buck there. So this is the docs. Let's go to an arbitrary page here. I'm just gonna go to learn how to use Fleet. It's one of our opening pages, and I'm gonna hit this edit page button. And I guess before I get too deep into it, you can also see that as you make your screen smaller, we have complete control over this layout. You have your outer layout here, and then you also have this kind of flexible markdown, or this flexible layout that takes the markdown that's compiled and then make sure that it kind of looks decent throughout the documentation. You can see we added this banner. This is living outside of the markdown stuff. This is maybe we have some style tweaks we need to make there, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, so when I hit edit on this page, what that does is you can see in the bottom left corner of my screen here, it's sending me directly to editing a particular file, and it drops me right into the GitHub code editor. So this is awesome, especially even for people who join your company or your organization who may never have used GitHub and Markdown before. You can get dropped into this, and it's pretty easy to see what to do, right? Like, I don't have to know that this is a heading to realize this is the title of the page. And with some context clues, I can get productive in Markdown pretty quickly. So you can see it's just a Markdown file. You can see at the bottom there's a little meta tag, and I'll blow this up so it's easier to see. And these will vary depending on what page it is, right? Like if I'm looking at the handbook, there's these little pictures that show who the directly responsible individual is for each page, to show who will review pull requests and merge pull requests. Like you can see this is Zach. So if I go and I edit the handbook page and I go to the bottom, I think it ended up elsewhere. There we go. We need to move these meta tags to the bottom. So I'll actually do a pull request and do that right now. And this is just by convention. We have them at the bottom to make it easier for everybody to find these. I'll just do handbook, move meta tags to bottom for consistency. But anyways, you can see that the actual title for the page is listed here, and then also there's a maintained by key that's set to the GitHub handle of the person whose picture this is, which is Zach Wasserman. So that is all. Any other kind of data we want to send to the front end code that's custom, that's just implemented as meta tags down here. And this could be anything. This is just the way we decided to do it here. And that's what the code that you'll see in a second parses. So this is the experience that folks have. They just propose changes, creates a pull request. If there's a PR template in your organization, it'll show up. But in this case, it doesn't apply to what we're doing. And then I'm just going to pick the reviewer. So I know that this page, the DRI, or the directly responsible individual, is Zach. So I'll just pick Zach Wasserman, and then I'll create the pull request. So other than requiring a GitHub account, that's how easy this makes it for anybody to edit your web page. And just a side note, what I'm doing here is all public, right? But you can actually apply the same principles for areas of your website that you want to be only accessible to your team. So if this repo was a private repo and it was a confidential, or it was limited who I wanted to be able to actually change this page or suggest changes to these pages, then all I would have to do is use a private repo. And what I'll talk about a little bit at the very end is some of the GitHub automation we've built around this as well. So because different areas of the repo are better for other people to edit than others, we have a bot that will actually like detect who's editing an area, see if they are automatically approved to just make changes. And in this case, I am, because me and a few other people at the company go and do follow-on handbook edits to clean things up afterwards sometimes, so we get automatically approved. And we'll cover how that works in a little bit, but that's what this bot's doing. That's totally optional. You can use this whole workflow and process with or without that. So going back to our the docs, you can see that actually, because different pages may want to show up at different spots in the nav, we have this kind of like 100, 200, 300, 400 thing going on, where you can actually specify the page order, and that will determine where it appears within its section. So taking a closer look at this nav, you can see we ended up with 3 top-level sections in the Fleet docs. In the Sails.js docs, there's actually a lot more depth right? And part of that is just the age of the framework and how much surface area there is in terms of config and functionality. So you can see, most of the time it's only one level deep, but in some cases it'll actually go deeper and deeper. And I think if we go into advanced usage, we can see that, right? And this is cool. This adds quite a bit of work. So the learning from the Sails.js docs is really to avoid the deep nesting if possible, because you often can get away without it. And that's what we ended up doing in the Fleet docs, mostly just to simplify the not just the implementation of the code that creates this nav, but also just to kind of limit how deep we can really nestle content, because you have to remember that all that content exists and maintain it, presumably forever, right? For it to be useful for your audience. So the simpler, the better. So you'll see actually in the code that drives all of this, the navigation is only 2 levels deep throughout. That can be expanded as deep as you want, but take it with a grain of salt. All right, so we can kind of see what the end result looks like now. And we saw what the flow looks like to actually make a change to this. Now let's take a look at how it works. So if I go into the Fleet repo, you can see at Fleet we use the main branch as kind of the current deployed reality, right? The current production reality. And depending on what area of the repo you're talking about, because we are a mono repo, we do everything with one repo whenever possible. And we're also an on-prem capable open source product. So the actual code for the product is not necessarily going to be the latest on main, and because we release every 3 weeks. So there are areas of the repo that have different release cycles, and that's totally okay. The way we handled that is we ended up putting the entire website. So this is actually the Sails app here. We put this into a subfolder called website, and it's really just its own little world. So it has its own package.json file, its own README. It's got instructions. So this actually has, there is a database. There's some functionality going on here beyond just the static content. But you can see the way it works is there's this script called build static content. And that's really what does the magic of taking that markdown from other places in this repo and condensing it into HTML. So let's take a quick look at that file, because that's where most of the action is. So it's under here in scripts. So this is a script you could just generate with Sails generate script, build static content. And if let's just look high level here through the file, we're talking about maybe 500 lines of code. This could have been broken up, but for the sake of just having it all live in one file, so it's easy to copy and paste anywhere you need it, we left it like this. And the cool thing about that for you is if you want to use the same functionality, whether it's your blog, it's your documentation, it's your handbook, really any area of your site you want to drive this way from Markdown, you just really need to paste this file into your Sails app and then tweak the paths, right? There's also a little bit of extra code in here that does some magic with taking some YAML and turning that into JSON configuration. But that could be left out if it doesn't apply to you. Just take this code and just remove it. It's everything on the first half of this parallel path here. And you can see we've optimized this a little bit because there's lots of changes coming into the repo, so we wanted to make it kind of as fast as possible to deploy. So that's what we're using the simultaneously helper for here. So just getting into the thick of it, you can see here the 3 areas of the code base where we pull Markdown from. So you can actually do this with so you don't have to use the same repo, right? The learning from the Sails.js docs was worth it. Getting everything into one repo was awesome. It's made it like way easier to just onboard folks to the code base and understand how it all works. The more repos you have, the more things you need to keep track of. If you have issues enabled, the more places you need to look for issues. Or if you don't, you have to like come up with tactics to make sure that you're looking across all the different repos involved to see those issues. So this was just a really useful thing for us at Fleet. But you can actually customize this code and have it pull from other repos as well. And you can actually see there's some links here that link back to how this works in the Sails.js docs. And you can actually see the history of exactly how this evolved. And there's lots of useful stops along the way if you do have a multiple repo layout where you might want to borrow it. Also, the code is pretty simple, so if you just need to edit it yourself, you can see it's just some like for loops here, basically. So docs come from this folder, handbook comes from this folder, and articles come from this folder, and these are all at the top level. You can see that most of the complexity here really comes from mapping the paths around, doing some regexing, making sure that the link to edit actually points to the right place in the repo, making sure that the files are end up in the right place once they're compiled into HTML. And then the rest of it is there's just some nice little features which I'll run through really fast here. So as far as the HTML itself, there is some code syntax highlighting that's automatically handled here. And then there's actually some history where we've taken it out of the Fleet repo, but you can actually look back in time or look at some of these other issues and see exactly how you can get the same functionality as on the Sails website. I'll just show you an example. So in the Sails reference docs, if I was going to look at, let's say, the Blueprint API, we have these little bubbles here, right, that indicate the types involved. And these bubbles are one of the things that can get automatically handled here. Same thing if you want to use like Highlight.js or a different code syntax highlighter in the front-end code. That can all be done with these I guess we can call them battle tested. They've been working fine for almost 10 years now. These regexes here that basically drop the code language inappropriately based on what's in the markdown code for your code snippets. And then it also handles automatically taking care of external facing URLs. So if I'm looking at the docs, and you'll find this is true for Sails.js.com and FleetDM.com. If there's a link here like Vagrant, right? It's nice to not, if you're in Markdown, there's not really an easy way to put target blank, right? Yada yada, and then target equals blank. Like you can write that in Markdown, but you have to write HTML, and then you're starting to get into the weeds, and it's like, why not just write HTML at that point, right? So to make it so you don't even have to really think about this, we have sort of a convention over configuration bit of logic here, which will automatically detect whether a URL is external, and if it is, it opens it in a new tab. Otherwise, it just automatically maps it back and forth, and this makes it so that also in your Markdown, you don't have to really worry about putting the fully specified URL everywhere. You can, but it kind of just makes it quote unquote just work. And there's a lot of little details like that, which I won't drag you through the muck of right now. Although very useful things that came up kind of over the years. It would be like, oh, somebody has a bug report on the website. What's the problem? Oh, something with the compilation didn't work quite right. And so we sort of folded those in over time, and that's what you're looking at here is that same kind of bit of code that's been rewritten and rewritten. The comments are pretty good in here, so if you ever do want to like tweak that or add additional stuff, it's pretty easy to do so. But really, most of the effort here is just pasting this in, running through the code really quick, seeing what you want, right? Like, so your article categories, like if you're going to use it for a blog, you're going to want to indicate what the blog categories are. It's all pretty simple JavaScript to read. And then the very last thing that this does is it actually uses the Sails.rc file as the source of truth for the navigation. So this way in your front end code, your markdown actually just ends up as HTML. Let's pull up the code where it actually dumps it out. And then it also keeps this manifest of all the markdown pages that were created. So, you know, what's any meta tags that were included in the page. In a few cases, there's some special stuff like title, where it is actually handling it directly. And then the HTML ID, which determines the file name used. So with the way this works to actually get the changes when you merge a pull request live is through a GitHub action. And that's actually just in the Fleet repo as well. You can just go click on the .github folder and then just poke around, not an issue template, but I think in scripts or workflows, and then deploy Fleet website. And what you'll see here is this is actually a little bit more complicated than it might have to be for you, because you don't have to deploy from a subdirectory, right? If your whole repo is a Sails app, this makes this even easier. But if you do want to just have a folder in your repo called website, this is how you do it. All of this code is commented quite well. It's been used on a lot of different Sails apps, and you'll see it's very similar to what you're going to get in the package.json file on a new Sails app. And you can see it's actually just running this build for prod script, which you can look at the package.json file in the website folder here. And you can see exactly what build for prod does. So it compiles the markdown content. If you wanted to see this spelled out a little bit easier, just search for and, right? And I'm just going to Command D or use whatever the equivalent is in your tool of choice, and you can kind of see the script here. But this part should never need to change. And then I just want to draw your attention to two more things. So there is also a GitHub action, or beyond the GitHub action, there's actually a GitHub Web Hook. So if I go into the website folder again, and I go to the actions, you can see there's in my webhooks, I've got this action called receive from GitHub. And what this does is, if you remember the days of Sailsbot, when Sailsbot was, Sailsbot has gone through lots of waves and has been more and less active over the years. I think we landed in a pretty happy medium place with all the stuff that Sailsbot does. But this is actually what powers Sailsbot, as well as what powers the bot and the Fleet repo. So this folder, this is a single file. It handles incoming requests, basically activity on GitHub. And you can see a lot of it's commented out because we're not actually using it in the Fleet repo. But some of it we are. And so this is where the bot you saw that did the auto approval lives. You can see we actually handle freezing and unfreezing here in the repo when we're in the middle of a release, so that we're not merging pull requests right in the middle of that. And this is also where there's a manifest of who's kind of allowed to merge their own pull request to which files in the repo. This part's totally optional, but there's a lot of great code that you can just copy paste and use yourself if you want to do some GitHub automation. You can also do a lot of this kind of thing in Zapier if you'd rather not use code for it. Although if you're someone who's writing a Sails app, you may find it's easier just to like go in and tweak the JavaScript directly. And then last but not least, I'll just draw your attention to one other action, which is useful and pretty easy to overlook and kind of important if you're going to use this for your actual blog or your docs. And that's, you want to make sure that folks can, and by folks I mean search spiders, I guess, can find your content, right? So if people are Googling or on DuckDuckGo and start typing in a search, they want to see your website in the search results, right? So to facilitate that, it can help to create a sitemap.xml file. And since you have a bunch of dynamically created pages, you want to have those actually power the sitemap and be able to show up in search. So that's exactly what this action does, is it loops through the markdown pages and it makes sure that they exist in your sitemap. So if I go to fleetdm.com/sitemap.xml, you can see I have all of this generated sitemap here. And this includes our blog articles, the docs, and the handbook. And that's it. Hopefully that helps get you started getting a static site running on top of Sails.js. All of the code that you looked at today is open source and freely available on github.com/fleetdm/fleet. Wish you the best. Thanks, everybody.